You know, uh, there's this old saying that seeing is believing.
Right.
And it's the absolute foundation of how we navigate the world, really. You look out the window, you see heavy rain falling, so, you grab an umbrella before you leave the house.
Yeah, it's a very comforting, just a straight line from your own perception to physical reality.
Exactly.
We rely entirely on that visible cause and effect. I mean, without it, you kind of lose your baseline for making sense of daily life. It's really the anchor of human rationality.
But imagine a scenario where someone steps right between you and that window,
Okay.
and they point directly at the pouring rain, and they tell you with absolute unwavering authority that it's actually a beautifully sunny day.
Wow.
And they don't just, state it as an opinion.
Yeah.
They demand you put on sunscreen, pack away your umbrella, and act as though the sun is just beating down on you.
That's intense cognitive dissonance right there.
Right. And today's deep dive takes us right into that exact feeling. We are unpacking this highly provocative essay titled The Trial of Nations. Now, you, listening, you know that the subjects this essay tackles, specifically the recent U.S. and Israeli strikes involving Iran, are incredibly charged, ongoing geopolitical conflicts.
Very much so.
So let's establish our mission right out of the gate here. Our goal today is not to take a side.
Absolutely not.
And we are certainly not here to validate or endorse the author's politics. We're here purely to reverse engineer their argument.
That is such a crucial distinction to make. I mean, the author's essay is an attempt to build a literary framework for understanding modern media spin.
Right.
So we're just going to examine how they use classic literature to critique the way news is delivered to the public. It's an analysis of the lens itself, to see exactly how it bends the light of current events.
Yeah, I'll admit, though, when I first saw Franz Kafka mentioned alongside modern Middle East conflicts in this text, it felt like a massive stretch to me.
Oh, sure.
I mean, we're talking about a century-old surrealist author. How does this essay actually bridge a surrealist fiction about, a nameless abstract crime to concrete modern-day missile strikes?
Well, they make that bridge by focusing on the concept of the defendant.
Okay.
The author heavily invokes Kafka's protagonist, Joseph K., from the novel The Trial. And if we look at the mechanics of Kafka's world, Joseph K. is arrested one morning, but the warders refuse to tell him what he did wrong.
Right, he has no idea.
Exactly. He spends the entire novel trying to navigate this invisible, deeply irrational court system. And the author's key insight here is that the court in The Trial doesn't actually need evidence of a specific crime. It just needs a permanent defendant.
Because in that system, guilt isn't tied to a specific action you commit.
Right.
It's a status you just simply hold by existing.
Precisely. It is a status offense. And the author argues that Western media and major political figures treat Iran in this exact Kafkaesque manner. Well, they're framed not as a nation-state making strategic, observable moves, but as a perpetual defendant in the court of global opinion.
Okay, I get the literary theory, but how does that actually play out in real-time news coverage?
Yeah.
You can't just assign a status to a whole country without people noticing the actual physical events happening on the ground. How does the author prove this is happening?
So the text points to a very specific piece of evidence to demonstrate the mechanics of this. They cite a moment from the recent coverage where the German chancellor publicly appealed to Iran to end the war.
But wait, looking at the chronological timeline the author lays out in the essay, the U.S. and Israeli strikes initiated this specific cycle of the conflict.
Correct.
So how can the party that was on the receiving end of the initial attack be the one demanded to end it?
Well, the author calls this the Kafkaesque magic trick of retroactive guilt.
Retroactive guilt?
Yeah, it's a fascinating manipulation of time. The dominant narrative simply erases the initial aggression from the public record. And once that blank space is created at the beginning of the timeline, the party that was attacked is suddenly magically responsible for ending a conflict they didn't actually start.
That's wild.
The essay points to headlines featuring phrases like, Iran escalates or Iran caused global economy shutdown, arguing that these are not objective news reports.
Right?
They're predetermined verdicts disguised as journalism.
It's like, okay, imagine you're standing by a swimming pool and someone violently shoves you into the water.
Okay.
You splash everywhere, and then the lifeguard immediately runs over, ignores the person who pushed you, and starts screaming at you for getting the pool deck wet.
Yes.
The initial push, the actual root cause of you being in the water, is completely wiped from the official record of the incident. You're just the guy who ruined the deck.
That analogy captures the exact mechanism the author is highlighting. Because the lifeguard isn't just yelling, the lifeguard is writing the official incident report. And that report begins the moment you hit the water.
Right, the push never happened.
Exactly. The court assumes the crime before presenting any evidence, placing the accused in a position where they are forever trying to rationally prove their innocence to a system that has fundamentally irrational rules. It ensures the accused is always on the defensive.
Kafka explains how you get blamed for the wet pool deck, but it doesn't really explain how the media makes the person who pushed you disappear entirely.
Right.
I mean, blame is one thing, but for that level of reality editing, the author realizes Kafka isn't quite enough.
Which is why the essay makes a hard pivot to George Orwell.
Okay.
Specifically, his novel 1984 and the infamous psychological torture chamber, Room 101.
Oh, man. Room 101.
Yeah, the author zeroes in on the scene where the party enforcer, O'Brien, is torturing the protagonist, Winston Smith.
Right.
O'Brien holds up 4 fingers, but he demands that Winston see 5. And the author asks us to look closely at the why of that scene. I mean, O'Brien doesn't just want Winston to lie to avoid pain.
No.
He isn't just looking for verbal compliance.
He wants Winston to genuinely, internally believe that there are 5 fingers.
Yes.
He wants to break the mechanism in Winston's brain that connects physical reality to his own thoughts.
That is the ultimate goal, the absolute annihilation of independent perception.
Wow.
The party wants citizens for whom truth is whatever the system dictates in that exact moment, regardless of what their own eyes tell them. And to bring this into the modern context, the author uses a stark, real-world example of this Orwellian mechanism at play.
Okay, play it on me.
They point to Pete Hegseth, who the text refers to as the U.S. Secretary of War.
Now, here's where it gets really interesting. I want to really zoom in on this Hegseth example because it feels like the linchpin of the whole essay.
It really is.
The text describes him giving very specific instructions to the press about how to frame an ongoing story. He instructed them to change a news chyron from Mideast war intensifies to Iran increasingly desperate.
Right.
And if you're just glancing at a TV in an airport, you might just see that as updated copy. But the author is arguing this is a profound psychological operation.
It is profound because of what it deletes from reality. Let's look at the linguistics of the first phrase. Mideast war intensifies. That phrase implies 2 sides.
Right, it's an interaction.
It implies a sequence of action and reaction. It's a neutral description of a physical event occurring in the world.
But changing it to increasingly desperate completely removes the context of a 2-sided conflict. Hegseth isn't just spinning a policy. He is acting as a literal editor of reality.
Exactly.
He takes a complex geopolitical, multi-actor situation and reduces it to a singular psychological condition.
He turns an interaction into a pathology.
Yes.
And the author pairs this observation with an analysis of an anonymous tweet that went viral during these events. The user expressed sheer shock that Iran blocked the Strait of Hormuz, writing, "after we started bombing them."
Which perfectly highlights the sheer absurdity the author is pointing out.
Yeah.
You launch a bombing campaign against the nation, and then you're genuinely shocked when they react in a hostile manner. I mean, the author is showing us that the cause and the effect are being surgically severed in the public consciousness.
Completely separate.
The 4 fingers of the initial bombing, the physical aggression, are being turned into the 5 fingers of unprovoked desperation through the sheer assertion of narrative power.
It's the total divorce of action and consequence. The initial bombing is rendered innocent and invisible, while the inevitable response to that bombing is rendered criminal and surprising.
Okay, so let's figure out how this machine actually operates day to day.
Okay.
Because you can't just snap your fingers and make millions of people forget a major military campaign.
No, you can't.
There has to be a sequence, a causal chain of narrative manipulation to pull this off. How does the author break down the actual playbook?
Well, they present what they call an anatomy and distortion.
Anatomy distortions.
Yeah, which operates as a strict sequence of necessary preconditions. You cannot achieve the final result without going through the steps in order.
Okay, so what's step 1?
The first mechanism, the absolute bedrock of the whole operation, is erasing the origin.
Because if you don't erase the origin, none of the rest of the trick works.
Exactly.
If the public timeline includes the fact that side A bombed side B first, then side B's response makes logical sense.
Right.
So how do they execute this erasure in the daily news cycle?
Through a massive coordinated chronological sleight of hand. And they often use passive voice.
Ah, passive voice.
Yeah, instead of reporting country X bombed country Y, the headlines read, "Missiles were fired in the Middle East."
Just spontaneously appearing missiles.
Exactly. Or, more effectively, they simply start the reporting clock the moment the target reacts. The initial U.S.-Israeli strikes vanish from the timeline entirely, creating a narrative vacuum.
And once you have that vacuum, you can execute the next mechanism inverting the roles.
Yes.
Because the origin is gone, the public is presented with a blank slate where the defender suddenly looks like the unprovoked attacker.
Exactly. The attacker is transformed into the potential victim, and the defender is recast as the aggressor. But the system knows that simply swapping the roles isn't enough, right? People might still ask questions about the new aggressor's motives. So the next necessary mechanism is to pathologize the defendant.
This is where that linguistic shift we talked about earlier comes back in full force,
Right.
framing them as a regime acting out of desperation. The author notes this is crucial because you negotiate with the government. You contain a pathology.
Exactly.
You don't ask a disease for its side of the story.
You merely seek to eradicate it. And to maintain that pathology narrative, to keep the public from feeling any empathy for the newly minted aggressor, the author points to a deeply dark fourth requirement.
Which is?
Erasing the casualties.
Because civilian deaths from the initial strikes don't fit the narrative of a surgical, justified intervention against a desperate regime.
They actively contradict it. So, to use Orwell's terminology, those casualties become unpersons.
Wow.
They simply cease to exist in the mainstream media coverage. If they are never reported, they never died in the minds of the public.
Which leads to the final mechanism, the glue that holds the whole distortion together, demanding compliance.
Yes.
The system requires you to internalize this new narrative so completely that the original facts, the initial strikes themselves, become literally unimaginable. You are demanded to see the 5 fingers, and if you point out the 4 fingers, you're treated as a conspiracy theorist.
And to explain how the system sustains itself ethically in the public eye, the author introduces a concept they call the weaponization of victimhood.
Okay, break that down for me.
This is how the inversion is permanently locked in.
How does that work in practice? I mean, how does a state with overwhelming military superiority successfully play the victim?
Well, the author argues that Israel, along with its Western supporters, maintains a highly disciplined media narrative of perpetual endangerment.
Even while attacking.
Exactly, even while actively participating in or initiating strikes against Iran. The author views this as the ultimate Orwellian achievement. The party that possesses the dominant military advantage, the party initiating the kinetic action, successfully presents itself to the global public as the fragile, endangered party that is merely surviving.
So what does this all mean for us? Because to me, this completely hollows out our political vocabulary.
It really does.
Think about the buzzwords we hear constantly repeated on the news. The author highlights how specific words are deployed as weapons rather than descriptors. The word escalation, for instance.
Yes, the author points out that escalation is reserved exclusively for Iran's responses. The initial strikes that trigger the response are never labeled as an escalation.
And proportionality. We hear that word all the time.
All the time.
But it's a standard that is only ever demanded of the victim, never required of the initial aggressor. The dictionary definitions of these words are just gone.
Goof.
Stability simply means a lack of resistance to whatever the dominant power is currently doing.
They have ceased to be descriptive terms and have become bureaucratic tools of enforcement. It brings us right back to Kafka's Courtroom. The official language sounds incredibly legitimate and legalistic, but the meaning of the words is entirely rigged against the accused before the trial even begins.
It feels like trying to do math where the value of 2 plus 2 keeps changing depending on who is doing the equation.
Exactly.
Which brings us to the human cost of all this. Building on these mechanics of distortion, what does living under this altered reality actually do to a person? What's the psychological toll on the listener who is just trying to read their daily news feed and be an informed citizen?
The author outlines 3 profound psychological consequences of living under this kind of structural gaslighting.
Okay.
The first consequence they identify is exhaustion.
Oh, yeah. You listening to this have undoubtedly felt this specific type of exhaustion. We call it doom scrolling. You're sitting on your couch, swiping through your phone, seeing headlines that directly contradict observable reality like contradicting video footage you watched just yesterday, and you start wondering if your own memory is failing you.
It is incredibly draining to constantly fight a system that you cannot see and cannot fully understand. Like Joseph K., you simply get worn down by the sheer weight of the irrationality.
Yeah.
And that exhaustion leads directly into the second consequence, isolation.
Because when the public narrative diverges so sharply from the physical reality you observe, you begin to doubt your own sanity.
And the author stresses that this is not an accidental byproduct.
It's intentional.
It is a structural feature of the gaslighting. The system is designed to isolate you in your own perception. If everyone on television is agreeing that there are 5 fingers, you feel entirely alone in seeing the 4.
Which inevitably leads to the third consequence.
Despair.
Yeah.
The overwhelming, crushing feeling that the distortion is permanent and that any form of resistance is entirely futile.
Yeah.
If the entire global media apparatus has already decided the story begins with a response, why bother trying to point out the initial strikes? Why shout into the void when the whole world is chanting in unison?
It is an incredibly bleak picture the author paints. But they don't leave us completely in the dark, do they? After breaking down this massive architecture of control, they propose a solution, or at least a method for maintaining some semblance of sanity.
They do. The author calls it the simple yet profoundly radical act of witnessing.
Witnessing. Think back to Winston Smith in 1984, secretly writing in his physical diary in the corner of his room where the telescreen couldn't see him.
Exactly. Even though Winston is ultimately broken by the party at the end of the novel, his crime, the crime of seeing reality clearly and recording it truthfully in his own mind, was a vital act of rebellion.
Right.
The author argues that in our modern context, witnessing is the antidote to the despair.
It's the act of maintaining your internal timeline. It's collecting the tweets that contradict the official narrative, noting the blatant hypocrisy in the press conferences, and simply refusing to let the origin of a conflict be erased from your own memory.
The author's point is that simply saying to yourself privately, "I see 4 fingers," is an act of preserving the human mind against the crush of the system.
Wow.
You might not bring down the global media apparatus, and the invisible court might never acquit the defendant, but by recognizing the distortion for exactly what it is, you carve out a small, private sanctuary of freedom. The system only truly achieves total victory when you genuinely, internally believe the 4 fingers are 5.
It's truly wild to think about. We were talking about a 100-year-old book with The Trial and a 75-year-old book with 1984.
Yeah.
Yet, they provide this perfectly tailored, incredibly precise vocabulary for decoding modern geopolitical media spin. The author uses them brilliantly to show us how narratives are constructed, enforced, and ultimately internalized today.
It speaks to how deeply Kafka and Orwell understood the underlying timeless mechanics of power.
Right.
And the inherent vulnerabilities of human perception. I mean, they weren't just writing about the specific totalitarian regimes of the 20th century. They were mapping the enduring architecture of narrative control.
But, there was one final thought I want to leave you with. Something for you to mull over that builds on this whole framework, but takes it a step further into our current reality.
Okay.
The author's entire argument relies heavily on the idea of one monolithic party or one overarching court controlling a single dominant narrative.
Right. They're describing a centralized authority dictating a singular false reality from the top down, forcing everyone to look at the same hand and see 5 fingers.
But look at our hyper-fragmented digital landscape today. It isn't just one centralized broadcast network anymore.
No, not at all.
What happens when it's not just one party, but multiple fiercely competing political factions, algorithmic echo chambers, and siloed media networks, and they're all simultaneously demanding we see 5 fingers?
That is the terrifying evolution of this concept.
Yeah.
Because in that scenario, they're all pointing at entirely different, mutually exclusive realities.
Exactly. How do you maintain your role as the impartial witness when everyone around you has built their own personal Room 101, complete with their own custom-made truth?
Wow.
It's like going back to that window from the beginning. Someone is standing in front of you, telling you it's sunny, while someone else stands right next to them, screaming that it is actually a blizzard, and a third person is insisting the window doesn't even exist.
Yeah.
And you're just standing there holding your umbrella, trying to point out the rain. How do you hold on to your perception when the Orwellian distortion is coming from every conceivable side, tailored specifically to your biases? Chew on that the next time you open a news app.